Welcome to the third module on qualitative research, module 24, titled Methodology in Qualitative Research. In the first two modules, we looked at what qualitative research is, what it is characterized, what are its characteristics, and we also looked at the four major theories of qualitative research. Now, in this module, we will look at how it is conducted, the journey from the beginning when it starts and what it leads to, the research outcomes. The objectives of the module. At the end of this module, the student will obtain an understanding about the assumptions underlying qualitative research paradigm, understand the value framework that anchors the whole process of qualitative research, learn the process of conducting a qualitative research study from problem identification to report writing. What are the assumptions on which qualitative research methodology is based upon? The first assumption is all meaning is subjective, influenced by various factors including historical, cultural, political and economic context of the researched or respondents. Second assumption, which follows the first, is therefore the researched are the key to open the door to these subjective meanings. The researcher can understand it only through the processes used by individuals to enact and create social reality. If the meaning is subjective, then only the person who has experienced that reality knows the meaning that he is or she is giving to it. So, only by interacting with that person closely will I understand that meaning. Therefore, the third assumption is this calls for an interpretive position rather than a normative one. My focus will to understand the interpretations rather than seeing what is a norm, what is common for all. Interpretation is by the researched and not by the researcher. As I said, as a researcher, I am trying to understand the interpretations that are made by the researched. I am not interpreting his or her reality. The fourth assumption is an interpretive position appreciates the importance and role of the indigenous knowledge and context. The knowledge, it believes that each respondent, each researched has practical wisdom arisen out of his or her experiences, the context in which he or she has lived it. Therefore, there is equal importance to understand this context and indigenous, that local knowledge in which the research is being conducted. The last assumption is the main task of the researcher is to depict the varied interpretations of the researched. If these are the assumptions, what are the values that would govern a qualitative research process? First is non-judgmental attitude. The researcher strives to take an unbiased stand. Whatever he or she comes across during data collection might be very different from what he or she believes to be proper, right, based on his or her experiences or socialization, culture, context. So, it is very important for a qualitative researcher to have a non-judgmental attitude. It is also important because qualitative research goes in depth of a particular phenomena. The second value is open-mindedness. It is an essential value of qualitative research to be able to recognize, accept and respect diversities. Only then you are going to understand the varied interpretations. The third value is flexibility. It needs to be flexible in approaching a study topic or interacting with the research depending on the demands of the situation at the time of data collection as well as responses of the researched. Qualitative research will not have the kind of structured data collection tool that is used in quantitative research. Also, as a definition suggests, qualitative research uses multiple methods And because you want to collect descriptive data, in-depth data about a phenomena, you might collect data through different methods and not only one method, and not only at a specific period of time. The data collection goes over an extended period of time, and for that you need to be flexible as a researcher. Honesty to the researched. Honesty is in qualitative research means openness on the part of the researcher that rejects intentional duplicity and deceit. As I have mentioned when I was explaining in the first module on qualitative research, that to accept that my own personality and my characteristics, my beliefs and my values might influence the research process does not mean that it is permitted. It just means that I am aware of these influences taking place, so that I will try my best to stick to the interpretations of the researched and not include my own views, which will be intentional duplicity and deceit. Innovativeness is another value in qualitative research. Innovation in research means the creation of new designs, concepts and ways of doing things and their application in diverse settings or situations. The most important value in qualitative research is confidentiality. Breaches in confidentiality not only shatter the researcher-research relationship, but also damages the people's trust in researchers. Qualitative research, I keep saying again and again, goes in depth. It collects something which is not visible, which is not obvious to people, and therefore, to keep this data confidential is very important also to protect research from the potential harm in certain situations. To give you a brief overview of qualitative research, if you look at it as a journey, then the first step is deciding on a journey, identification and statement of the problem, purpose of the study, determining the objectives of the study. Then what you do? Once you decide on a journey, you actually embark on it. So, which includes in qualitative research conceptualization of the study, deciding the sample, research setting selection and choice of research methods, data collection methods. Then the actual journey. The journey has started. Now, the actual journey includes data collection process, methods of verification of the data, data analysis and procedures to identify patterns in the data, which is mainly the aspect of data analysis. And finally, you reach the destination, which means in qualitative research, outcomes of the research study and its relation to theory in terms of generating insights, new insights or new discoveries. A qualitative research can probe, identify or explore various mechanisms and strategies related to individual, group or organizational behaviors. It can also look at problems and issues such as drug addiction. Identification of a research problem in qualitative research can also include processes such that of teaching, learning, caregiving or supervising. A research topic in qualitative research can also be on naturally occurring interactions between individuals and groups. It can be behavioral indexes such as expressions of anger. It can be situations such as human trafficking, or a research topic can also be on an aspect or a whole of certain human experience. So, that is what a qualitative research problem identification will include. Literature review in qualitative research. Now, there is a debate over whether a researcher should review the literature in qualitative research. In the introduction to the discovery of grounded theory, Glaser and Strauss in 1967 opined that a qualitative researcher aims at unearthing the meaning of experiences and phenomena as research participants or researched understand it. and experience it without any external influence. And one of the external influence they said might be literature, previous literature on it. Therefore, they said that he or she should not conduct literature review prior to the data collection, so as to prevent it influencing the perception and understanding of the data. However, presently there are many like Flick, who in 2009 argued that literature review is a very valuable process even in qualitative research. So, what all that is entailed in the process of literature review in qualitative research? It is a selection of available documents, published as well as unpublished on the topic. It provides different perspectives and standpoints on the idea and concept under study given by others. It outlines the research findings and evidence related to these standpoints. It explains how the same or similar topic has been investigated before, and literature review also includes an evaluation of these selected documents in relation to the research being proposed. Conceptualization and conceptual mapping is the next step in qualitative research process. Concept map as a tool for developing and clarifying theory was first developed by Joseph Novak in 1984. The conceptual framework given by Miles and Huberman 1994 is similar to concept mapping. So is the integrative diagram by Anselm Strauss. So, basically concept map, conceptual framework and integrative diagram mean more or less the same in qualitative research. A concept map or a conceptual map gives a visual presentation of the territory the researcher wants to study. It is not a picture of the study itself. It is a visual presentation of all the aspects of the phenomena within that particular context that the researcher wants to study. What are the characteristics of a conceptual map? The researcher creates concepts from personal experiences, creative thoughts, observation or prevalent knowledge. That is why I have said that it is not a picture of the research study itself, because your conceptual map will change, but somewhere there has to be a beginning. And therefore, the way concepts are mapped on a conceptual map with its relationships can be based on how the researcher understands it at the beginning of the journey. Concepts can be simple or complex. Concepts contain built-in assumptions and statements about the nature of things that are not observable or testable. For example, when I say a concept called gender discrimination, there are certain built-in assumptions that gender discrimination exists, okay? And it means that one gender has more power than the other gender. A conceptual map has two parts: symbol, which is a diagrammatical dimension, and text, which are the definitions of concepts and interlinkages between concepts. The text clarifies and refines the conceptual map. What it means that if in a conceptual map related to gender discrimination, I have put gender discrimination in the middle, which is a core concept, and if I have put culture, gender, physical characteristics as three different concepts and have linked all three to the core concept of gender discrimination, the text that will follow will define gender discrimination. What do I mean by culture, what do I mean by personal characteristics, whatever concepts that I have put on the conceptual map, and will also explain the linkages that I have mapped on the conceptual map. In conceptualization, defining the concept is important as it gives direction to the process and denotes the scope of analysis. Concepts are rarely used in isolation. Rather, they form interconnected web with different types of relationships with many other concepts in a conceptual map. There would be certain concepts which would recur in connection with the topic under study during literature review, and most probably even during data collection. These are the core concepts of the study, drawn generally at the center or top of the conceptual map. The way I will decide what all aspects I am going to cover in my study through conceptual map, I will also decide the research setting where the data will be collected. Once the researcher works out the conceptual map, it helps in the next stage of selecting the location, such as community or a geographical area or an organization where the data collection will take place. This stage of designing field setting for research is an important component of qualitative research process, as it, along with the conceptual map, creates a boundary to the qualitative data collection process, because the data collection in qualitative research goes in depth. So, you need to put certain boundary. First, you are putting first boundary through your concepts. So, you are saying that this is the delimitation. I am delimiting the scope of my research by specifying that these are the major concepts that I am going to study, and I am also specifying the outer framework of my research by specifying the location. Once I decide that, I will also have to decide the sampling. Unlike quantitative methodology, which is statistical sampling, in qualitative methodology there is theoretical sampling. In quantitative research, the study population or the sampling frame, based on that the sample of my study is decided. In qualitative research, it does not happen in the same fashion. It is not the number of respondents or research that is important, but the quality and the depth of data received. The size of the sample in qualitative research is determined tentatively by the scope of conceptual map. When you start your research study, the concepts that you have included in your conceptual map will guide you, will direct you to the people that you need to ask questions. Saturation point in the sampling occurs when any more number of categories of sample are not going to lead to any new information. Thus, if the researcher is aiming at theoretical saturation, the size of the sample cannot be predetermined. It gets determined as the data collection goes on, and where I start getting the same information or more or less same information from new researched or new respondents, I realize that I have reached a theoretical saturation point, and there I will stop my data collection. So, the sample size will be determined by the data that I keep collecting during my data collection process. Therefore, you cannot decide upon the number of sample size before you go to the field to collect the data. However, some researchers start with a priori determination of the sample based on certain criteria or strategy, because every time this theoretical saturation might not be feasible. And also, when you are giving a proposal for funding, you need to have some idea about the sample size of your study. Selecting typical or extreme cases. Selecting cases that would help get maximum variation in the sample, called maximum variance sample, or selecting cases that are easiest to access are some of the criteria given by pattern to help in sampling process. In other words, in qualitative research, you can have expert sampling, typical case sampling, maximum variance sampling, or convenience sampling or purposive sampling as it is called. The size of the sample is also determined by the quality of the data collected from the researched. If the researched or respondents have the necessary knowledge and experience and are able to articulate them well, a lot of data is collected by a single respondent. Therefore, the sample size will be relatively lesser than in situations where the researched are either do not have that kind of experience much or are not able to express them properly. Data collection process in qualitative research starts very early in the research process, as this methodology is iterative and inductive. The data collection process leads to lessening of the gap between the field and the knowledge. In most of the qualitative research studies, the data collection is done using multiple tools and methods. Some of the salient methods of qualitative data collection include in-depth interviews, systematic observation, focus group discussions, and document based methods. Data collection, the whole process of qualitative research is iterative, means that it does not always go from one step to the second and from the second to the third till the end. It can go from first step to the second step, from second step to the third step, from the third step back to the second step, because as I have said that sampling or sample size in many times determine when the data is getting collected. Therefore, it can go from data collection to the previous step of sampling, or it can even refine the research topic, which means that it is going back to the first step of the research process. Therefore, it is very necessary to start data collection as early as possible in qualitative research. Then comes the data analysis. There are three main phases that one can see in the data analysis of the qualitative research. The first is ongoing discovery phase. In this phase, the researcher is involved in identifying themes. He or she also develop concepts and propositions even during data collection. Then the consequential analysis phase. This phase involves extensive coding of the data and refining what one has understood of the subject matter. And the final phase, in which the researcher tries to locate his or her findings in the context in which they were collected. This also involves verification of the data collection, which in turn might lead to further data collection to bridge the gaps detected. As I said, in the second phase of data analysis, a lot of extensive coding is done, which is one of the main ways of analyzing qualitative data. There are three types of coding. First is open coding. Open coding includes initial naming and categorizing of phenomena through close examination of the data. Then the axial coding. In axial coding, the focus is on discovering linkages and specifying a category with its properties. So, it goes one step ahead, one step further than the open coding. In open coding, only labeling takes place. In axial coding, its properties, its linkages start getting highlighted or coded. Then the third is selective coding. It is the process of selecting the core category and systematically relating it to other categories which have emerged from the data, or some of which might also be there in your initial conceptual map. Validating those relationships and filling in categories that need further refinement and development. Though I have noted three types of coding, they might not always come one after the other. For example, open coding and axial coding can go hand in hand simultaneously. Selective coding generally happens when some of the open coding and axial coding has already been done. Then comes the report writing. Once your analysis is done, what are the main characteristics of a research report in a qualitative research? Some of the salient dimensions of qualitative research report are: it includes description of the research process much more in detail than in quantitative research. It has rich description of the data. It will include new concepts or expansion of existing concepts. For example, to take the same example of a study on gender discrimination, your data might reveal certain dimensions of gender discrimination which were not known before, or it will give a different meaning, a new meaning to the whole experience of gender discrimination. Qualitative research report is generally written in a narrative style, and it will also include identification and explanation of negative cases or uncommon responses. In qualitative research, even if one case is different from the rest of the cases, it is given equal importance even in the final stage of research report. That was a brief overview of qualitative research process, from problem identification, literature review, conceptual map, deciding about research setting, deciding about data collection tools, data collection process, analysis of the data, and report writing. Thank you.